My husband coldly announced to the board of directors, "You're fired. Take this old laptop and get out of my company." That sentence erased 40 years of my youth sacrificed by his side to build the million-dollar empire we have today. Next to him, the secretary turned Mistress smiled smugly and laid her hand on his shoulder like she was the new lady of the house. I choked up and swallowed my tears. Moments later, security threw me out the door along with the beat-up laptop they mockingly handed back. But they had no idea that in just 10 minutes, the passcode I'd planted on that laptop would bring their million-dollar empire crashing down in front of them. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I am Margaret Hill, 66 years old. 40 years ago, my husband and I built NextCore from a tiny apartment with just 2 plastic chairs and 1 old computer. I'm the software engineer, the brain behind the system, and he's the one who went out into the world to persuade clients. For decades, I lived in the shadows, believing everything we did was 50-50. But now, looking back, I see I've been reduced to a faint shadow behind him, pushed out of the light by the very man I trusted completely. I stood still in the long hallway, the pale neon lights reflecting my face on the glass wall. Vanessa's high heels clicked behind me, mixed with a soft, mocking laugh. The board sat in silence. Not one person spoke up for me. A few had once been friends, had shared those brutal startup days with me, and now they only bowed their heads to the table as if my presence was an annoyance. I held the laptop in my hands, the keys worn shiny from tens of thousands of hours of coding, the very lines I wrote to protect hundreds of American companies from cyber attacks, and now it was handed back to me like trash. I heard Thomas whisper to Vanessa, "It's done. From now on you'll run NextCore with me." His voice was dry and cold, nothing like the man who once held my hand in a musty Seattle apartment 4 decades ago and promised to walk with me to the end of life. 2 security guards closed in. One said, "Mrs. Hill, this way, please." I swallowed hard, not wanting them to see me cry. I strode out with my head high, as if I were the one choosing to leave. The glass door shut behind me, leaving me alone in the crisp wind of an October morning in Boston. I took a deep breath. Inside, I burned and ached, like someone was crushing my heart in their fist. I gave up my youth, my dreams, my own career to build NextCore with Thomas. I sat night after night in a cramped kitchen, writing line after line of code while he met with investors. I stood by him through the lean years, when we couldn't afford a bed and slept on a mattress on the floor. And today, after 40 years, he wiped it all away with one sentence, "You're fired." I sat on the cold stone steps outside the NextCore building, clutching the laptop to my chest. People passed by, glancing at me, a 66-year-old woman in a business suit, face pale but eyes still blazing. No one knew that inside this old machine was the weapon I'd spent months preparing. 10 minutes. Just 10 more minutes and the code I planted would start running. It wouldn't destroy data or endanger clients, but it would expose the truth that I alone held the security keys. It would turn everything Thomas and Vanessa bragged about into ashes. I remembered Vanessa's look when she put her hand on my husband's shoulder, triumphant, like she'd won a dirty game. They thought I would cry, beg, and walk away a loser. But they forgot I'm the one who wrote NextCore's brain. Without me, this empire is a sandcastle waiting for the tide. The church tower bell nearby rang. 1, 2, 3. My heartbeat matched it. I opened my purse and glanced at my phone screen. The countdown was running. 9 minutes and 13 seconds left. I closed my eyes and let the memories flood in. Back to an autumn morning in 1985, when Thomas and I sat in a small cafe in downtown Seattle, plotting a crazy idea, a system that could predict and stop cyber attacks. People laughed and said we were just a dreamy couple. But I believed in my mind, and Thomas believed in his gift of persuasion. Every line of code, every design, every draft contract bore our mark. I lived my whole life for that dream. And now I was being tossed aside like an old thing. The wind picked up, red maple leaves scattering around the steps. I pulled my coat tighter and looked up at the 15th floor, where the board still sat in that glass room. By now, Thomas was likely lifting a coffee with Vanessa, certain they had erased me for good. I smiled faintly. They didn't know that my hands were the ones holding their fate. I inhaled again, my hands trembling but my eyes sharp. In a few minutes, Nexcore, my brainchild, would show the world who truly held power, and when it did, Thomas, Vanessa, and the entire board would face the bare truth. They betrayed the wrong person. I remembered clearly those first days in a shabby rented apartment on the outskirts of Seattle. A one-bedroom, creaky hardwood floors, and a kitchen corner too small for a proper table. We had one old computer with a thick monitor, slow as a snail, and yet it became the heart of our dream. By day, I worked part-time at a small bookstore to pay rent. By night, I sat on the floor among piles of sketch paper and diagrams, typing line after line of code. On the table sat a cold cup of coffee, next to a half-eaten packet of instant noodles. Some nights I worked until the sun pushed through the window, my hands so sore I could barely lift them, but I still squeezed in one more line. Thomas, brimming with the energy of 30, wasn't good at programming but could sell ice to an Eskimo. He knocked on doors everywhere, offices, cafes, where young investors met to pitch the idea we believed could change tech, a system that predicted vulnerabilities before hackers struck. Not just blocking or patching, but seeing the risk before it happened. At first, everyone laughed. Some patted Thomas on the shoulder and called it far-fetched, saying no algorithm could predict cyber attacks. But he came home, saw me grinding away at that old machine, and said, "Keep writing, Margaret. I'll make them listen." So I wrote, and wrote without stopping. The code piled up, bugs appeared and vanished. I fixed, tested, failed, and started again. The tiny apartment smelled of coffee. The keyboard clacked under the constant drizzle of Seattle rain. Sometimes we fell asleep on the floor and woke with aching backs, then smiled at each other. One day, it'll all be worth it. When the first prototype finally ran, Thomas hugged me, eyes shining. "We did it. Margaret, you're a genius." I smiled, sweat still on my brow. In that moment, the toil melted away. We got married just as the first product launched. No lavish dress, no grand aisle. I bought a simple white dress online for $200. We went to City Hall on a Tuesday afternoon, signed the papers, then celebrated with pizza at a hole in the wall. Thomas took my hand, eyes sincere. "We're 50-50 in work and in life. I promise." That promise guided me for years. I believed him. I believed we were one, inseparable. The company grew. We moved from the apartment to a cheap room in an old warehouse. Paint peeled on the walls, exposed pipes, concrete floors, yet it felt like a palace. I set up the servers in a corner, ran cables everywhere, and Thomas put up a whiteboard with a goal. $1 million in contracts within 2 years. When we signed our first small deal with a local insurance company, we hugged and cried right there. It was only a few $1,000s, but it proved the dream was real. The years that followed were golden. I worked 18 hours a day, writing hundreds of thousands of lines of code, building new algorithms. Thomas crisscrossed the country to meet clients, raise funds, and pitch to investment committees. Sometimes he came home late, exhausted, but still held me and whispered, "We're winning, Margaret." Our love was tied to the work. I remember our 5th anniversary when we skipped a fancy restaurant and ate cup noodles in the office. The neon flickered, but Thomas poured me a cheap glass of wine and said, "This is the most romantic dinner of my life." I laughed, raised my glass, believing our love was unbreakable. We hired more staff and moved to a larger building. Then came the fateful day, our first $1 million contract, A major financial group agreed to use our system. I still see Thomas bursting into the office, face flushed with joy, holding the contract high like a championship trophy. Staff applauded, and I stood still, tears of pride falling. In that bright glow of success, my love for Thomas deepened. I thought this was every couple's dream: build together, win together, stand together at the top. I had no idea that the old 50-50 promise would be betrayed so cruelly. In the early years, during staff meetings, Thomas and I sat side by side and shared duties. I explained the tech. He handled finance and strategy. We were two halves of a song, in perfect rhythm, but slowly, the tune fell out of sync. I remember a Monday morning meeting. I was presenting a new algorithm diagram, explaining how it could detect vulnerabilities in real time. Eyes were on me, but before I could finish, Thomas cut in. "Let me translate that so it's easier to follow," he said with a thin smile. He rephrased what I'd just said in simpler terms, sometimes twisting the technical meaning. The room chuckled as if he'd told a joke. I sat there, gripping my pen, feeling like a teacher out of place in her own classroom. At first, I thought it was just thoughtless, but it became a habit. Every time I started to speak, Thomas would jump in, stressing that, "Margaret is brilliant, but let me explain it in a way that's easier to digest." Gradually, I noticed the board's eyes on me had changed. No longer full respect, more like half patient, waiting for Thomas to translate. I spoke to him privately more than once. "You don't need to cut me off," I reminded him. "I can be clear on my own." He slung an arm around me and smirked. "I'm just helping. You're smart, but sometimes too detailed. People need the big picture, not a bunch of tangled code." That cut deep. Weren't those tangled lines of code the company's soul? Without them, what was there to brag about? But Thomas had gotten used to being the talker, and I was pushed back into being the doer. I felt it even more in client presentations. At first, we stood together. I ran the demo, he persuaded. Then I turned into a prop. At a meeting with a big bank, I spent a week preparing a live demo. I presented, nerves high, and hit enter to run the system. The light flipped green, results perfect. My heart soared. But before the client could clap, Thomas stepped up, slung an arm over my shoulder, and smiled. "See, that's why NextCore is different. Margaret is a genius, but she's better suited to the back room. My job is to bring this achievement into the spotlight." I forced a smile, but inside it felt like a bucket of cold water. His words shut a door in my face. I belonged in the back. The spotlight was his. After those presentations, I often sat quietly in the car, watching Seattle's streetlights blur by, my heart heavy. The old 50-50 promise had faded. I tried to push back. In one meeting, I stood and said plainly, "This technology is the result of months of research. I think we need to explain it accurately, not oversimplify it." Thomas glanced at me, then turned to the board. "Margaret sometimes gets lost in the technical weeds. It's because she's passionate. My job is to keep things clear for customers." They nodded. A few smiled at him with sympathy, like he was a patient husband enduring a wife too absorbed. I felt my heart crack. The shift didn't stop at work. At home, Thomas started dismissing me. Before, we hashed out every big decision for hours. Now he just said, "I've decided. You don't need to worry." One day, I asked about the company's new direction, and he snapped, "Margaret, just do your technical part. Strategy is my job." I was stunned. The "we're 50-50 promise lived only in memory. Reality had become, "I speak, you execute." Over time, the board began to see Thomas as the face of the company. They called him the Pathfinder, and I was introduced as the woman behind the screen. Every time I heard it, my chest tightened. I didn't crave the spotlight, but I needed fairness. Our relationship frayed by the day. Dinner, once when we talked about work and dreams, turned into silence. He stared at his phone, texting someone I didn't know. When I asked, he said, "Clients, partners, urgent stuff." I wanted to believe him, like I had for decades. But deep down, I knew the seed of betrayal had sprouted. When I looked back on our youth, I remembered the old apartment, the sound of rain at the window, the moment Thomas took my hand and swore we'd be 50-50 in everything. That look was gone now. In its place stood a man who craved applause, loved the spotlight, and slowly treated me like a shadow. I had been his other half, co-founder, confidant. Now I was just the backroom tech. The bitterest truth was that the husband I trusted absolutely was the one who pushed me out of the light. I remember clearly the day Vanessa appeared at NextCore. It was an April morning while I was reviewing resumes for an executive assistant. Among the bland applications, hers stood out like a gilded card: an MBA from a prestigious California university, experience at 2 major tech firms, and a strong record with international clients. I was the one who signed off and pushed her into the final round. I believed the company needed someone energetic, great at communication, to support Thomas with partner meetings. Back then, I simply thought she would ease the load for both of us. I didn't expect that my own decision would open the door for a storm to blow into my life. On her first day at the company, Vanessa brought a box of pastries and set it in the middle of the employee break room. She beamed, called everyone by name, even folks who'd only been there a few months. I still remember her coming up to me, placing a small pastry on my desk, and saying, "Mrs. Hill, I've heard so much about you. It's an honor to work with you." I smiled back. Inside, I felt a bit warmed. For years, hardly anyone showed me small kindnesses like that. I believed Vanessa was a good person and could help NextCore. In the first months, Vanessa worked so hard it surprised everyone. She remembered every employee's birthday, prepared little cards, and sometimes even organized surprise pastry parties. She knew how to lift morale and make the company feel like a family. It didn't take long for Vanessa to become Thomas's right hand. For every client meeting, she arranged everything from seating and materials to snacks. She traveled with Thomas on business trips, stood beside him during presentations, and took meticulous notes. I saw the growing chemistry between them. At first I told myself it was just work, but then the overtime started cropping up. Thomas often called home saying, "I have to stay at the office. Vanessa and I still have a lot to finish." At first, I believed him. But when it happened nearly every night, my trust began to shake. I remember one time, it was close to midnight when Thomas finally came home. His shirt smelled strongly of a sweet perfume I'd never smelled before. When I gently asked, "You're working late, are you okay?" he snapped, "Margaret, don't be so suspicious. You always worry for no reason. You know, sometimes you're not stable." "You wear me out." I went silent. In 40 years, Thomas had never spoken to me like that. His blame felt like a knife. I could only stay quiet, swallowing my hurt in the dark. From then on, the distance between us grew. In the mornings, we hardly talked. At night, he often claimed urgent meetings or demanding clients. I realized our dinner table now had just me, staring at the empty chair across from me. At the company, I began to feel like an outsider. Younger employees ran to report to Vanessa more than to me. For important meetings, Thomas sat with her to discuss, and I was only called in to sign off on technical matters. They treated me like a quiet workhorse, while the spotlight and praise went entirely to Thomas and Vanessa. Sometimes I looked at Vanessa and saw her smile when someone called Thomas the soul of NextCore. That smile felt like a pinprick to my chest. I remembered when Thomas used to call me his indispensable other half. Now, our marital trust had been smoothly and cruelly replaced by Vanessa. I started to ask myself, did I hand Thomas the keys to destroy our marriage the day I signed Vanessa's hiring paperwork? That night, a light rain fell and wind from the Seattle Bay stirred the bedroom curtains. I sat at the desk, the warm lamplight on my thin hands as I reviewed the monthly financial report. Thomas said he'd be late because of an out-of-town client meeting. I was used to nights like that. Urgent calls, unscheduled trips, and those short texts. "I'm busy. Go to sleep." But that night, something kept me from turning off the light or going to bed. A vague intuition slipped into my heart. When Thomas came home, it was close to 1 a.m. I heard the car engine outside. I walked to the living room, pretending to fold blankets. He opened the door, his shirt wrinkled, collar slightly open, and what stunned me was that familiar sweet perfume, the very scent Vanessa wore. I said nothing and just looked at him. Thomas avoided my eyes and quickly set his briefcase on a chair. "I'm tired, don't start," he said, then headed straight to the bathroom. An hour later, when he was asleep, I went to that briefcase. I'm not a nosy woman, but my gut told me something was waiting inside. I opened his phone. His passcode was still the 4 digits of my birthday. He didn't think I'd check, maybe because he believed I was too gentle to doubt him. Then I saw the message. A short line, but it felt like a cold blade straight to my chest. "Tonight was a dream. I'm waiting for you." The message was from Vanessa Clark. Below it were rows of bright red heart emojis. I sat frozen as the screen blurred before my eyes. I read it over and over, my hands shaking. Every character, every punctuation mark was another cut. I didn't scream, didn't throw the phone, didn't wake him to confront him. I simply turned off the screen, put everything back exactly where it was, and stepped out onto the balcony. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside me was a storm with no end. For days afterward, I moved through a daze. I went to the office and watched them standing together in the hallway, Vanessa smiling, holding a stack of files, Thomas resting his hand on her shoulder to point out something. The gesture was intimate enough that anyone could see it. I told myself maybe I misunderstood, that it was just workplace closeness. But then, while reviewing company expenses, I found strange payments. Luxury hotel bills in Portland, Denver, Napa Valley, all labeled client meetings. The odd part was those clients didn't exist. Quietly, I copied all the statements and saved them in a separate file on my personal computer. A cold feeling spread through me as the pieces of truth locked into place. Then, on a Monday morning, while checking internal emails, I accidentally saw a misdirected message. It was addressed to Thomas, but because the system still had me in an old permission group, a copy landed in my inbox. The subject line was short: "The weekend cabin will be ours." I opened it. Vanessa had written, "I set everything up. Just come, and I'll cook your favorite dinner. No one can bother us." I read each word slowly. My chest tightened. The weekend cabin, the place Thomas and I used to visit on our anniversaries, where he once said it was just for the two of us. Now it was their nest. I couldn't breathe. I stood up, went to the bathroom, and looked at my face in the mirror. A 66-year-old woman with tired eyes and silvering hair. I saw pain there and awakening. I knew if I exploded, everything would blow up, but anger would only make me lose control. I couldn't lose like that. I had to let them stab themselves with the very blade they forged. I began quietly gathering evidence. Every email, bill, and text was copied and saved in a folder encrypted with technology I built for NextCore. Then one day, luck smiled, or maybe fate took my side. A young IT staffer, Kenny, came to me looking uneasy. "Mrs. Hill, I think you should see this." He set a small USB drive in front of me. I found a file flagged hidden in the camera system. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I respect you. I opened the USB in my private office. The screen showed grainy footage from the building's elevator camera. Thomas and Vanessa, embracing and kissing under dim yellow light, totally unaware of the hidden camera in the corner. I sat motionless. No more tears, no more trembling. Just a cold emptiness. Maybe the most painful thing isn't the betrayal itself, but having to smile as if you don't know. I wondered, Have you ever had to stay silent like that just to keep your self-respect? If this story touches you, leave a few words in the comments. I read every single one. I captured each frame and saved them with the texts, emails, and statements, everything compiled into a secret file named Project V. In my head, I heard my own words from years ago. We're 50-50 in life and in work. Now I understood. I was the half he cut off when I was no longer useful. That evening, when Thomas came home, I still cooked dinner like usual. I didn't ask, didn't accuse, didn't look at him for too long. I wanted him to believe I knew nothing. I listened to him talk about a long, exhausting meeting, smiled, and poured him more wine. Inside, I felt a chilling calm. That night, I lay beside him, listening to the steady breathing of the man who once meant the whole world to me. I realized my love for him had died. Only duty and habit remained. But underneath that quiet, a different fire was growing, the fire of resistance. I swore they would never guess that the woman they saw as weak would be the one to bring it all down. I didn't need to scream, didn't need a dramatic scene, didn't need tears. I needed a plan. And that plan began that very night when I reopened my laptop and looked at the old code security routines only I understood, only I had the right to touch. They think I'm weak, I whispered to myself. But this time their betrayal will turn back on them. Outside, the city was deep in night. Lights shimmered on the quiet lake, reflecting my own soul, a woman who gave her life to love and work, now standing at the fork in the road of defiance. And deep down I knew, when morning came, I wouldn't be the Margaret of yesterday anymore. After the night I gathered enough proof of betrayal, my heart turned to ice. I didn't break down like a cheated wife. Instead, a quiet strength rose in me. I understood. I couldn't beat them with tears, and certainly not with pleading. I could only win with what I created: code. From that day, I quietly built what I called insurance code. In every line of NextCore's system, I embedded an invisible signature, a mark of authorship, like my secret signature. It didn't affect operations, no one but me could spot it, but it proved one thing: I was the one who wrote this system's soul. Every night I stayed late at the office. The glass walls reflected my silhouette in the empty room. My fingers tapped steadily, each keystroke like a heartbeat. I created escape hatches, hidden back doors only I knew how to disable. If I was ever pushed out completely, a few keystrokes could halt the system, and only I could restore it. I didn't do it to destroy, but to protect myself. In tech, power doesn't lie in a CEO title or on-stage speeches. Real power lives in the code, where everything lives or dies with one press of enter. And on that battlefield, I knew I was still unbeatable. I remember the night I finished the first block of insurance code. Rain pattered outside, fogging the window. I wiped tears with the back of my hand and stared at the black screen glowing with green lines. A mix of pain and pride rose in me. Pain from my husband's betrayal and being pushed from my rightful place. Pride because I still had the strength to hold on to my life's work. But I didn't stop there. I started logging every commit, every change and update to my name. I stored careful backups with timestamps, clear proof that I built the foundation. I knew that one day, when Thomas and Vanessa tried to erase me, I'd have a vault of evidence to fight back. At the same time, I quietly investigated finances. With a seasoned eye, I spotted shady expenses. A subsidiary set up in Delaware, a strange name, getting regular cash from NextCore. I followed the trail and found it was a shell company where Thomas and Vanessa could siphon money unnoticed. I printed every transaction and filed them neatly into a second binder labeled Black Finance. I reached out to an old lawyer, Mr. Peterson, who helped us file the original incorporation 40 years ago. When he reviewed the new records, he frowned and flipped back and forth. "Margaret, your name is gone from the list of co-founders." In the original, your signature is right here, but in a recent edited version, it's only Thomas Hill. Someone altered the documents. My blood boiled. It wasn't just betrayal in love, it was betrayal in law and truth. They wanted to erase me as if I never existed. I left the lawyer's office and walked through crowded streets with a hollow heart. Whenever I thought about being humiliated like that, I cried. But I cried in silence. I refused to scream or complain to anyone. At night, when Boston slept, I sat at the screen, fingers flying, tears hitting the keyboard. It felt like every line of code was my own blood. Some nights, I couldn't tell the rain outside from the sobs caught in my throat, but I kept going. I added more layers of insurance, more hidden notes, more back doors. NextCore became a city of secret tunnels, and I alone held the map. One morning, I watched Thomas head to work in a crisp suit, Vanessa glued to his side with a stack of documents. They walked fast, laughing like they owned NextCore. I stood at the 10th floor window looking down and thought, "Go on, soak in the glory. You have no idea each step you take is on a minefield I planted." There were moments of weakness when I wanted to charge in, throw the file right in Thomas's face, and scream that I knew everything. But I held back. I understood that the moment I showed my hand, they'd try to wipe me out. If I stayed silent, I was the shadow in the corners, a threat they'd never see coming. I lived two parallel lives. By day, I was Margaret, the gentle, quiet, soft-spoken co-founder. By night, I was a different Margaret, the betrayed wife, the coder setting traps, the silent fighter. Every keystroke, every new line of code was a blade I was sharpening for the day of reckoning. Once, staring at my fingers trembling from fatigue, I asked myself, at 66, I should be resting, enjoying peace with grandkids. Why am I still wrestling with these cold lines of code? Then I knew the answer. Because I refuse to be buried. I won't let anyone erase 40 years of my life like deleting a file on a computer. On the final night before finishing the entire insurance system, I typed the last command and leaned back in my chair. On the screen, the words blinked. Execution completed. I closed my eyes and heard my heart pounding. I knew that from that moment, I'd taken my power back. I was no longer the abandoned, weak wife. I was Margaret Hill, the creator of NextCore's brain, the only person with the key to open and lock its doors, and I swore I'd use the very tech I built to strike back. Not with knives, not with shouting, but with cold numbers and lines of code soulless yet strong enough to bring down an empire. Rumors began to seep through the company quietly, like thin smoke winding through the halls. At first it was just whispers behind my back, hesitant comments over coffee. Then it spread, turning into a widely accepted truth people nodded along to. Margaret Hill isn't mentally stable anymore. Vanessa planted the seeds. I knew that. She was slick, never said it outright, just dropped a few careful hints. Some nights I saw Mrs. Hill sitting alone in the office till morning, eyes red. It's really worrying. Or, she seems to think she's still the soul of the company. I feel bad, but I'm afraid she's living in the past. Words like that, dripping bit by bit, soaked into people's ears. Repeat them enough, and folks start believing. One morning, I walked into the break room. The group of younger employees went silent when they saw me, eyes sliding away. A few stood up quickly and left with flimsy excuses. I sat down and poured a cup of coffee, but the bitterness that day was hard to swallow. I realized I didn't belong there anymore. At lunch, co-workers who used to invite me out now quietly went without asking. Some even drifted away when I approached. Friendships I'd built over years dissolved, as if an invisible line had been drawn to keep me on the other side. I tried calling Linda a close friend from the early days. She picked up, voice uneasy. "Margaret, I'm really sorry, but I can't take your side now. You know, times have changed." Then she hung up quickly, leaving me standing frozen in my living room. I understood. Vanessa and Thomas had succeeded in pushing me to the margins. The boardroom was worse. Before, when I spoke, they listened. Now, during meetings, the moment I opened my mouth, their eyes went straight to Thomas or Vanessa. No matter what I said, it felt like a draft of air. Once, I presented a detailed report on a potential security flaw. I laid it out clearly, backed with data. When I finished, the room was silent. Thomas smirked and said, "Thanks, Margaret, but I don't think it's as serious as she's making it. We should focus on the market expansion strategy." Everyone immediately nodded and turned to discuss with him, ignoring my warnings. I sat there, hands shaking with anger, and no one cared. I started recording everything: board meetings, hallway whispers. I saved every audio clip, every email, every detail. I knew that one day, this would be my weapon to flip the table. But in the middle of it all, I had to face a hard truth. I'd been completely isolated. In the very company I built from nothing, I'd become a ghost. I walked the halls and people looked at me like a stranger, or worse, like someone unhinged. Some nights I came home, dropped my bag on a chair, and sat in the dark for hours. Loneliness filled the room. After 40 years with Thomas, all I had left was my own shadow. But instead of collapsing, another fire rose in me. I told myself, they built a wall around me to trap me, to block my voice. But they don't know I'm digging a tunnel right under their feet. Every night, when Boston went quiet, I sat at my computer, the blue screen reflecting a face lined with age. Tears fell sometimes, but my hands kept typing. I was no longer just a betrayed wife or a sidelined co-founder. I was a survivor, preparing for the counterstrike. That day would come, I was sure of it. And when it did, the wall they built around me would crash down under the roar of everything they had dismissed. That morning, Boston's sky was slate gray, drizzle clinging to the office windows. I arrived earlier than usual with a black coffee and a stack of documents. The building felt different, colder, so quiet I could hear my heels echo down the hall. At exactly 9 a.m., the intercom rang. Linda's voice, now Vanessa's private assistant, came through, flat and emotionless. "Mrs. Hill, the CEO requests your presence in the main conference room, right now." I knew. My heart knew why, even as my mind tried to stay calm. This had been set up for a long time. The rain outside felt like a signal for the last act of a play where I was the discarded character. I straightened my coat and stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers climb to 15, the floor I once saw as the pinnacle of my career, now just an execution ground. When the doors opened, Vanessa's familiar perfume flooded in the same scent I'd smelled on Thomas's shirt so many nights. The conference room was bright and cold. At the long oak table sat 3 people: Thomas, Vanessa, and Mr. Keller from HR. No one offered me a seat. Thomas looked up, his voice dry and mechanical. "Margaret, thanks for coming. We have a few things to inform you." Vanessa flipped through a folder, her voice light as air. "This is the board's official termination decision, effective immediately." I said nothing. I just looked at the thick paper, the bold lines like knife cuts. Reason: failure to cooperate with the executive team, creating a hostile work environment, damaging team morale. I let out a small laugh. Neat work, the charges crafted carefully enough to sound almost convincing. But when I looked deep into Thomas's eyes, I saw something there, not anger, but fear. Maybe he was afraid I still knew too much. Vanessa was different. She smiled, sat up straight, eyes gleaming with triumph. Every time I glanced over, she stroked her glossy brown hair, fingers brushing a gold necklace I knew Thomas had bought. Each gesture said, "I won." Thomas folded his hands, trying to keep his voice steady. "Margaret, don't make this harder. We'll wire your severance. Think of this as time to rest and enjoy your later years." I narrowed my eyes and asked slowly, How long have you two been sleeping together? The room froze. Vanessa stiffened, lips tight, face paling. Thomas looked at me, his face flushing. He slammed his hand on the table. Stop being delusional. You're degrading yourself, Margaret. I leaned back, a thin smile on my lips. Delusional? I just want a number. 3 months? Or 6? Thomas turned away in silence. Vanessa lowered her gaze to tidy her papers, her voice shaking slightly but trying to sound composed. I don't think this meeting needs to go on. The decision is signed. HR will guide you through the handover. I looked at her, my eyes cold as a blade. Be careful with the dream you think you're holding, Vanessa. Some things only show you the abyss once you've grabbed them. She didn't answer, just gave a small smile. The smile of a victor. Thomas stood, went to a cabinet, pulled out an old laptop and tossed it lightly toward me. Take it, Margaret. It's your old machine. I think you'll need it to write your memoirs. A couple of awkward laughs slipped from the other two. I looked at the machine's scuffed shell, worn-off keys, but inside it held everything they never understood. The insurance code. With a small command, that alone could bring their empire down. I took the laptop with both hands, holding it like something sacred. I looked up at Thomas, voice steady. Thank you. I will, in fact, need this. He raised an eyebrow, not catching the meaning. Vanessa smiled lightly. It's good you can take this so gracefully. I'll arrange someone to help you pack. No need, I said. Everything that belongs to me, I've carried it in my head for a long time. I turned and walked slowly toward the door. But as my hand touched the handle, Thomas's voice came from behind. Margaret, consider this final. Don't try to come back. I stopped, turned, and looked him dead in the eye. You're right. It is final, but not because you say so. Vanessa frowned slightly. Thomas stood frozen, his gaze wavering for a second before sliding away. I opened the door and left the room. But their script wasn't done. In the hall, 2 security guards were waiting. One stepped forward, voice cold. Sorry, Mrs. Hill. We've been instructed to escort you out of the building. I looked at them. No anger. No resistance. I just said softly, I can walk on my own. They still trailed close behind, as if I might steal something. At the lobby, one held the door, his tone curt. Please leave company premises. I stepped out. The heavy glass door closed behind me with a dry thud like a lock on fate. The rain was heavier. I stood at the entrance to NextCore, the place where I'd laid the first brick, sketched the first logo, celebrated the first contract. Now I was thrown out of the very home I built, like a stranger. I looked up at the 15th floor. Through the fogged glass, Vanessa's silhouette was clear, her hand on Thomas's shoulder. They were laughing. I pressed my lips together and gripped the laptop. My hands were ice cold, but heat surged in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't need to, because I knew that in just 10 minutes, the code I'd planted on this machine would start, not to destroy, but to restore balance. In 10 minutes, they'd learn what it means to wake the beast they thought they had tamed. I turned and walked into the rain. Cold drops stung my face, soaked my silver hair, and seeped into my collar. I didn't open an umbrella. I let myself be drenched, let the chill sink to the bone. On the sidewalk, I stopped and looked back one last time. The bold letters NextCore Technologies loomed, catching the light. I spoke softly, almost only for myself. You took everything, but you forgot. NextCore's soul is still me. I opened the laptop under the awning, the screen glowing in the rain. My hand trembled slightly as I typed a few characters. The command line appeared. System authenticated. Countdown initiated. I smiled. A calm smile, no hate, no bitterness, just balance returning to what was stolen. The rain kept falling. Under the gray sky, I quietly closed the laptop, slipped it into my bag, and walked away. Behind me, the empire they were so proud of was about to start shaking. I was still sitting on the cold stone steps, hugging the laptop, when the phone in my pocket buzzed. I pulled it out, the screen lit with a familiar line, Protocol Omega, activated. Below it, a red countdown, 10 minutes, 0 seconds. I took a deep breath and lifted my eyes to the towering glass building. Next core, my brainchild was humming like a giant machine, but in just minutes, it would start to falter, like a heart out of rhythm. And only I knew why. 9 minutes. I sat still, listening to the rain tapping on the metal rail. Inside, employees began to frown. Through the glass, I saw a few jump up from their chairs. Their screens flickered, systems slowed, cursors spinning endlessly. Complaints rippled across the rows. What's going on? Why are the servers so slow? 7 minutes. I saw an IT engineer sprint into the hall, phone glued to his ear. 5 minutes. Right on schedule, the customer portal went down. All transactions froze, thousands of sessions stuck. Customer service lines shrieked, internal alarms blared across the office. 3 minutes. A critical alert flashed across the global monitoring dashboard, critical error detected. And then, just as I predicted, the worst hit. International hackers spotted the hole. From everywhere, Russia, China, Eastern Europe, streams of IPs charged in like wolves smelling blood. They didn't care who NextCore was. They saw a fortress, once untouchable, now cracking. In minutes, hundreds of attacks erupted at once. The firewall buckled, red alerts flooded the system, and customer data jammed tight. I can picture the scene inside right now. A once quiet office turning chaotic. Chairs scraping, keyboards pounding, phones ringing off the hook. Employees rushing around, sweating through their shirts. Thomas is surely pale as a sheet. The man who used to stand under the lights bragging about impenetrable tech is now frozen in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead. Vanessa, who was so sure she had all the power, is probably staggering, lips trembling, that smug smile gone. Shouts must be echoing across the floors. The servers are down. We've lost control. Customer data isn't responding. Someone has definitely called PR, but how can they hide it when the press has already sniffed it out? In minutes, the major outlets start running red banners. Top cybersecurity firm NextCore suffers massive hack. Those words cut like a fatal blow. A company built on the promise of safety now exposed to the public like a sandcastle washed away in the rain. I stood up, a little shaky, not from fear, but from a mix of pain, anger, and relief. I looked up at the 15th floor, where the CEO's office lights blazed. The glass reflected panicked shadows moving back and forth. The rain poured harder, plastering my hair to my head, weighing down my Brad coat. I didn't wipe it away. I didn't run. I just stood there, holding the laptop, eyes locked on the building. A small smile slipped from my lips. Not the smile of total victory, but the smile of a woman who finally got her voice back after being trampled. They threw me out like trash. But 10 minutes later, those same people watched their empire fall apart right in front of them. Rain, mixed with tears on my cheeks, no one could tell the difference. I whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. This is only the beginning." The news spread faster than I expected. Within 2 hours of the NextCore outage, my phone was buzzing non-stop with alerts. American media, from local papers to top financial outlets, blasted headlines. Major cybersecurity firm hacked, NextCore systems in free fall amid global attack. A few sites added sharp commentary. If NextCore can't even protect itself, how can it protect anyone else? I sat in a small cafe on Tremont Street, sipping hot tea, watching quietly. On the wall-mounted TV, a live broadcast showed NextCore's stock chart. The red line plunged like a runaway train. Every minute, tens of millions in market cap vanished. Around me, people murmured. Most had no idea I was Margaret Hill, the co-founder kicked out just days ago. By noon, the market recorded it. Nextcore's stock had dropped more than 60% in just a few hours. A wave of sell orders flooded in. Investors had zero patience left. Nextcore's phones were surely melting down. Major clients, banks, and financial groups that once trusted our tech pulled contracts en masse. They didn't need to wait for an investigation. For them, trust was already dead. And in cybersecurity, trust is the biggest asset. Once it's gone, nothing can save you. That afternoon, I got an anonymous message from a former employee. Mrs. Margaret, the FBI just showed up at HQ. They've sealed off the 15th floor to inspect the financial records and systems. The Securities Commission is involved too. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel joy or gloating, just a long, hollow emptiness. The empire I'd spent 40 years building was collapsing in an instant. But I knew I wasn't the one who destroyed it. Thomas and Vanessa paved the way with betrayal, arrogance, and blind greed. I only opened the door and let the truth in. 2 days later, social media exploded. The hashtag #Nextcore collapse hit #1 on Twitter. Videos of employees shouting in the office, alarms blaring, leaked emails from furious clients, everything spread at lightning speed. People made memes, jokes, and mocked a name that used to mean security. Vanessa disappeared from every platform. Her LinkedIn and Instagram were wiped clean. Not a trace. Rumor had it she'd flown to Europe to dodge the backlash. Some sniped. Nextcore's power queen turned fugitive overnight. And Thomas? I saw him on TV a few days later. A gaunt man with dark circles under his eyes, messy silver hair, walking out of Nextcore's HQ, flanked by 2 FBI agents. Reporters swarmed, flashes popping. He wasn't a commanding CEO anymore, just a wrecked, beaten figure. The board had to announce his removal on the spot. People asked me later, "Margaret, did you feel happy watching him lose everything?" I just shook my head. Happy? No, but fair, yes. He chose betrayal, and this was the price. As for me, I didn't sit and watch the ruins smolder. While Nextcore was in free fall, I quietly met with a few former clients, the ones who believed in me, not the glossy Nextcore brand. I told them plainly, the real tech was still here, still working, and I was the one who built it. They listened and nodded. A few weeks later, I signed my first consulting contract under a new name, Secure Shield Solutions. A small rented office in Cambridge, just a few desks, a whiteboard, and 3 young employees. But in their eyes, I saw a bright trust I hadn't felt at Nextcore in years. On the day I signed that contract, Boston was drizzled in rain again. I stood by the window, looking out at the wet street, remembering the day I was thrown out of Nextcore, clutching my laptop. A moment that felt like an ending, but was really a beginning. Secure Shield Solutions, humble as it sounded, was my declaration. I didn't need a multi-million-dollar empire to prove my worth. I needed a place where justice belonged to the truth, where intellect and loyalty weren't betrayed. I put my hand on the whiteboard and wrote in big blue letters, not power, not money, trust. I knew my journey was entering a new chapter, and this time, I wouldn't be anyone's shadow. I was Margaret Hill, the woman who walked tall out of the ashes. That night, I just finished a long day with the young engineers at Secure Shield Solutions when I heard a knock. It was shaky, repeating, the kind of knock from someone exhausted, tapping with trembling fingers more than firm knuckles. I stepped onto the porch, opened the door, and there was Thomas. The man who once strode across stages in $3,000 suits was now a wreck. Wrinkled shirt, stained spots, hollow eyes, wild silver hair like it hadn't seen a comb in days. He'd lost weight, gaunt, sagging like a beggar. "Margaret," he whispered, voice breaking. "Please give me 5 minutes." I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe. I didn't invite him in. The Boston night wind was cold, but I stood steady. "What are you doing here?" I asked, calm. Thomas swallowed, eyes red. The company. It's dying. I can't bring it back. Investors pulled out, clients are gone. Nextcore has only 12 loyal employees left, but they don't trust me anymore. Margaret, please come back. I let out a small laugh, not bitter anymore, but the laugh of someone who'd seen the truth long ago. What do you want from me? I'm not your employee to order around. He took a breath and pulled a stack of papers from his pocket with shaking hands. He set it on the step in front of me. 48% equity, full authority over engineering. I'll sign right here. If you come back, Nextcore still has a chance. I looked down at the documents. He'd actually prepared them. Legal terms, draft signatures from his lawyer. Thomas was ready to give up power, the same thing he once ripped from me. I was quiet for a long moment, then lifted my head, eyes sharp as a blade. Do you know my conditions? He trembled. Name them. I must be recognized as the sole architect of the Nextcore system. All documents, statements, press, and client materials must name me. Don't call it a team effort, and definitely don't call it your achievement. He nodded immediately, almost frantic. And one more thing, I said, voice like ice. Vanessa will never set foot in Nextcore again. Not as an employee, not as a consultant, not as a friend of the company. Thomas pressed his lips together, hesitated, then saw my eyes, and knew there was no room to bargain. He took the pen and signed each clause, letter by letter, like a man sealing a coffin on his past. I took the papers, flipped through to confirm everything was in order, then nodded slightly. Good. I'll come back. But remember, I'm not returning to save you. I'm returning to save the technology, to protect the people who still deserve it. Thomas lowered his head, like he'd just heard a sentence. When I walked into Nextcore HQ again, the office was a ghost of itself. Empty rows of desks, dark screens, rolling chairs with no one in them, more than half the floor abandoned. No lively typing, no loud meetings, just 12 familiar, tired faces waiting for me in a small conference room. Sarah, a veteran coder, stepped forward first. We knew you'd come back. We're here for you, not for Thomas. I looked around. In their eyes, I saw a blend of despair and hope. They know. I no longer trusted the old system, but they still trusted my hands, and I knew that if I had even a small chance, I'd pull them out of the pit. I didn't waste time on speeches. I opened my laptop and projected the full system map, every weak point I'd quietly built in, now the key to patching it all. We start now, one hole at a time. I'll lead you through sealing each one. From that day, I dove in like I was 20 again, back on the floor of that damp Seattle apartment. Long nights with those 12 people rewriting modules, rebuilding the security architecture, erecting new firewalls, and most of all, restoring trust. Thomas almost never showed. He kept to a small office, avoiding everyone's gaze. I stayed with the team, splitting cheap pizzas, drinking cold coffee, typing till morning. No one called me the woman behind the scenes anymore. I led. I was the iron hand rebuilding Nextcore from rubble. By week 3, the first miracle appeared. An old client, Pacific Financial, emailed me directly, not through Thomas. We heard you're back. If you're personally leading the engineering team, we're willing to reconsider a contract. I smiled. It was the first sign of the Margaret effect, what the press would later call it. Within a month, 3 major clients returned. They didn't trust Nextcore, but they trusted me. Every new contract was another hammer strike securing the shaky foundation. The press, which had been waiting for bankruptcy headlines, began to change its tone. The sidelined founder returns, bringing hope to save Nextcore. Inside the office, you could feel life coming back. Employees lifted their heads, that abandoned feeling faded. And me, every time I saw the system glow green on the dashboard, every time All Secure lit up, it felt like a piece of my 40 years was given back. One late night, Thomas walked into the server room where I was monitoring a stable system for the first time in months. He looked at the wash of green screens, then turned to me and said quietly, "You did it. You saved NextCore." I met his eyes, calm. "I didn't save you, Thomas. I saved the technology I built. And I did it for the people who still deserve it. You just happen to still be here." He didn't answer, just turned and left. Inside me, there was no anger left, and no love either. Only one clear truth: I had won. Not by shouting or messy revenge, but by proving that skill and resolve can rebuild an empire from ashes. From that moment on, NextCore was no longer Thomas's company. It was the proof of the Margaret effect. The storm passed. After months of relentless work, NextCore slowly recovered. The metrics on the dashboards weren't burning red anymore, they turned green. Quarterly revenue climbed back. Old clients returned to sign again. And the twist no one expected: the company performed even better than before the collapse. The media called it a miraculous rebirth. But I knew there was no miracle. It was sweat, tears, and the stubborn resolve of me and the 12 who stayed. At the first board meeting after the crisis was contained, I walked in no longer the wife behind the scenes, but the chief architect, the company's backbone. The board members, those who had coldly voted to fire me, lowered their eyes, a mix of regret and respect. The board chair stood up, voice low. "We publicly acknowledge that Margaret Hill is the one who saved NextCore from the brink of bankruptcy. Her role is indisputable. She is the backbone." I stayed silent, giving a slight nod. The recognition came late, but it was necessary. It couldn't erase the humiliation I'd endured, but it returned one truth to me: justice, at last, belonged to me. Thomas was still sitting there. He tried again and again to cut in, to claw back his old role, but every time he spoke, I shut him down with numbers, with evidence, with architecture only I could explain. Faced with my cold, precise arguments, he went quiet. Once, after a meeting, he stopped in the hallway, voice choked. "Margaret, you're the smartest woman I've ever known." I looked straight into his eyes. In them, I saw a flicker of the man I once loved, the man who sat beside me eating instant noodles in a cheap rental. But that memory was ash now. I gave a faint smile. "Maybe, but you realized it far too late. Our love had died long ago. What remained was an empty marriage certificate form over substance." I didn't hold a grudge anymore, but there was nothing left to forgive. On the day NextCore held its rebirth celebration, the hall was packed. Bright lights, a huge backdrop reading, "Stronger than ever." I stepped onto the stage to a wave of applause that seemed to roll on, and on that stage, I stood alone. No Thomas at my side, no one left to dim my light. I looked down at the rows of faces, people who had doubted me, turned their backs, now listening closely. I drew a deep breath and spoke clearly. "Never underestimate the woman who built the kingdom." The room went still for a beat, then erupted in applause. I didn't need to say more. That one line said everything. That night I went home. I sat by the window, watching Boston's lights shimmer across the city. I thought about 40 years, white nights writing code, quiet tears, brutal betrayals, and the final smiles when justice came back. I knew this journey wasn't only about saving a company. It left a legacy for those who'd come after, that women, at any age, have the right to stand up, take back their voice, and claim their true worth. I lifted my head, feeling light. I was free. I was strong. And I had left a mark on this life that can't be erased. My story closes here, but its echo will linger. I want to sit and listen to you, the one following along. Where are you watching from? And which moment touched your heart the most? Leave a comment and share a few. The words. Your voice reminds me I'm not alone. If this story gave you even a little hope, please subscribe, hit like, and keep walking with me. I am truly grateful, not just for listening, but for helping me prove one thing. Justice always finds its way back, and a woman's strength never fades.